In this video, we are going to cover some basics of covalent bonding. Now, recall that the octet rule states that atoms tend to gain, lose, or share electrons in order to have 8 electrons in their valence shell. When we are dealing with covalent bonding, we are talking about nonmetal to nonmetal or nonmetal to metalloid bonding. That is what forms a covalent. And this is the sharing of electrons. If we lose or gain electrons, that is ionic bonding. So a covalent bond is formed when two atoms start to approach each other. They tend to attract each other's valence electrons, the outer electrons that they see. So here we have two hydrogen atoms. And as they come closer and closer together, the attraction for each other's valence electrons grows until they hit a certain distance that is the optimal distance at which they are going to bond. That is the covalent bond distance. Now, hydrogen obviously cannot have 8 electrons. It cannot obey the octet rule. So in this case, it obeys what we call the duet rule. Now also notice that neither hydrogen atom is strong enough to actually pull an electron from the other hydrogen atom. So this is going to be a covalent bond. It is the sharing of electrons. You got to remember that covalent bonding is sharing of electrons. Now, as I said earlier, that covalent bonding occurs between nonmetal to nonmetal or nonmetal to metalloids. And what we're looking at here is, remember, this side of the periodic table. And so boron, silicon, germanium, arsenic, antimony, tellurium, polonium, acetine, those are our metalloids. If they are bonded to things like carbon or nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, bromine, selenium, etc., that is going to be what forms a covalent bond. When a covalent bond is formed, the atoms can only form a certain number of bonds. Remember, we're trying to deal with the octet rule for the most part. So the number of bonds that can be formed depends upon the group number. You can usually form 1, 2, 3, or 4 bonds. There are some exceptions where you can have more than 4 bonds to the central atom, and we'll look at those in another video. But for example, carbon, which is in group 4A, can form 4 total bonds because it has 4 valence electrons. Remember, the 2s2 and the 2p2. Nitrogen in group 5 can form 3 bonds because it has 5 valence electrons and it wants to get to 8. So the 2s2 and the 2p3 are its valence shell. You can only get another 3 electrons, so it can only form 3 bonds. And the number of bonds formed is summarized by this table. If you have only 1, 2, or 3 valence electrons, you can only form 1, 2, or 3 bonds. That's like hydrogen only has 1 electron, it can only form 1 bond. If you have more than 4 or more valence electrons, you form enough bonds to get an octet. So the number of bonds is going to equal 8 minus the number of valence electrons. So with carbon, we had 4 valence electrons. So 8 minus 4 equals 4 bonds. With oxygen, here we have 6 valence electrons. 8 minus 6 equals 2 bonds that oxygen can form. If you want to know more about covalent bonding, check out the Wikipedia site on covalent bonding. I know a lot of people don't like Wikipedia, but in science it is pretty well controlled and is pretty accurate. So I hope you enjoyed this introduction to covalent bonding.